Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Speed Tips by Bob and Chad. Looking forward to it. We just got through with our last chassis school, the stock car school. It was great. Had a full crowd and very pleased. Great group of guys. I mean, I was impressed. There were a lot of questions and went really well. And of course, my good old buddy Paul Berger is always entertaining in itself. So having him at the school was a lot of fun, and it was pretty cool. So what's new and exciting at Weir's Machine?
Oh, just another busy build season Monday here. A lot of tech calls, a lot of product rolling out the door. So we're really close to March Madness, what we call. Has nothing to do with basketball. It has to do
Right.
with the month right before race season. So we're looking forward to that.
Yep. No doubt. That's pretty exciting. I mean, we get to March and have the races start there in mid March, and it won't be. Well, in 3 weeks, I think we'll be in Beatrice, Nebraska, weather depending, and so that's going to be exciting. And I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it. Of course, anytime I always enjoy the schools, but it's kind of after a point you kind of got this process done. Now it's on to the next thing, and I know we were pretty busy today. Austin was, of course, we had phone issues. The phone would ring and everything, but when you go to talk to the customer, it was kind of garbly. So we ended up having to call everybody back on our cell phones to be able to take the orders and get what the customer wanted. So that was interesting.
Technology, it's nice when it works, right?
It is awesome when it works, and when it doesn't work, and of course, we basically were high priority. So our high priority said that they can come and fix it on Wednesday. And I'm like, Wednesday's not going to work, man.
Yeah.
We need it fixed today. So I don't know where they ended up with that. Amy was dealing with the guy, and I know her day was stressful. Of course, she's getting ready. Her and her husband are going on their 25th anniversary. They're going to taking a trip to Hawaii.
Wow. Cool.
So she leaves on Thursday for Hawaii. And so she's got lots of things yet to do on that. And so it was, like I said, it was kind of hectic. And Bobby was out. His little girl was sick. And so he got to be a stay at home dad today. And so it was pretty exciting. Um, First question we've got is Rick has got a 2008 Midwest Modified Jones, 2008 Jones Midwest Modified, left front springs 500, right front springs 550. You once stated that you run the opposite pounds in sport mods. Should I be doing the same? Well, Rick, it all depends on how your car's working. If your car's working, I wouldn't change it. Um, you know, the problem we run into is we've got these cars tightened up to the point where we almost have to have that softer, or no, I shouldn't say that. We've got these cars to the point where they're free enough that we need to run a stiffer left front spring to help the car stay uh, tighter on the corner entry. And what happens with that, of course, is you end up having to soften that right front to get the car over in the right rear to get more side bite, and then you keep the left front a little stiffer to try to keep more side bite in the car. So it kind of is a driving style deal too, and it all depends on the driver. I mean, you know, a stiffer right front spring is going to have more forward traction up off the corner. As long as you can get it, as long as it works good getting in and through the middle, it'd be good. Chad, is there an option for a low friction inner tie rod for use with to use an IMCA? If not, you should make one.
Hmm. Well, there's a lot that goes into an inner tie rod. I guess we haven't really thought about making it, but I guess if we made it, it probably wouldn't be OEM, and I'm not sure if IMCA would like that. But honestly, the ones that we use, I don't think they're really that tight. I mean, I think after a couple nights they free up good, and you know, I mean, yeah, there really is no good option there. Most of them come from China anymore anyway, and we're kind of dealt the card that we're dealt there. But maybe I'll shoot my old buddy Brett a text message and ask him if we made a low friction inner, if he'd freak out on that. I don't think Howe makes one, do they?
I don't think so.
Does anybody make one? I don't think anybody makes one.
Not to my knowledge, not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. So I wish they would just say, Heims are okay, but man, that's not OEM either. So maybe send them a message that it'd be nice to have a 5/8 Heim on the inside. But
Yeah, I don't. I'll let you address that one. See how that goes over. Adam, Chad, I'm switching from the ID 5-inch drop cup to the OD 5-inch drop cup on my right front. Do I need to put a new screw jack bolt in there?
no, dimensionally they're the same as far as the screw jack is concerned. So you should be good with the same screw jack you have in the car now.
Larry says we need to keep the weather up here because he's trying to race down there in Texas. Well, I mean, the way the weather was this last weekend, it was awesome. It was like 55 degrees on Sunday.
It's a mess here. We got 8 inches of snow, and then I don't know if we got 2 inches of rain today, but flooding everywhere. It's a disaster.
Yeah,
I'm ready for spring.
Yep, we got an inch and a half of rain last night, and it kind of finished off the snow. There's very little snow left. Down on a Wasota Midwest Modified, when running slider and spring in front of the axle versus moving them behind the axle and the shocks in front, what's the best? What is the end result? Is one way better than the other? In my opinion, I like the springs in front of the housing for the ultimate traction. In your situation, Don, having I guess the Wasota rules, you've got to either put them both in front or both in back. If you could move the right rear behind the housing, would be a good deal. I know on IMCA we can't move any of that stuff. I'm not sure on the Wasota Midwest Modified. Actually, I think you can. I think you can actually move the right rear spring behind. That's going to give you a lot of traction off the corner on a slick racetrack, but it can be a little tight getting into the corner. So sometimes that's, having both springs in front of the housing is the most drivable car. Kyle, for someone who's 100 pounds heavier driver than the average, what suggestions do you have for things you would change? Well, we had a discussion about that this last weekend in our school because, believe it or not, some of the drivers were a little heavier than the 200-pound average guy. And what we kind of mentioned to them is just offsetting the weight. Now, I don't know what kind of car you're in, but if it's a modified, just instead of having all the weight being in the center, move some of the weight to the right, basically directly across from the driver over on those door bars on the right side, kind of balancing it out to the point where the car's, and you can move it a little further back if need more percentage, but balancing the car out to offset the driver's weight. That works really well. Troy, what gear do you recommend for Beatrice for a modified crate? I wouldn't have a clue. I hate to tell you, I wouldn't. I don't actually even remember what gear we ran the last time I was there. I haven't actually been there probably for 4 years. The last time I was there, we got snowed out, and I'm not a real winterland snow type guy, and I haven't made it back there. Greg Dinsmore, how are you doing? I see your sons are racing and having a good time. And I watch some of the Facebook posts from time to time that you and your wife do, and so nice to see you, or nice to hear from you. Oh, not this again.
Use your arrows.
My arrows don't work.
I think you got to click the sidebar and roll it for the arrows to start working.
Okay. Tommy, hi, I'm from Quebec, Canada. What frame height do you recommend on a stock car? I'm a stock car, and where do you measure them? Well, we actually measure it like we do our modifieds from the center of the lower control arm bolt to the ground. And I'm pretty sure that we're like 8 3/4 on the left side and 8 1/2 on the right side. I'm not super familiar with those right heights. I know in the back, the right rear ends up being about 5 inches, and that's measured between the top of the axle housing and the bottom of the frame rail. The left rear kind of just depends on how much bite you have in it, and of course you got to watch your deck height when you do that. So that's kind of a general area that I could recommend. Adam says, thanks, Chad. Looking forward to trying the new torque bearing out. Awesome. Torrington bearings out. Okay, Jacob, on a USRE B mod, what or how much do you lose having sliders behind the axle tube and springs in front? Shocks. I don't think that there's really a disadvantage, having it that way. I don't, I don't see what you would lose.
Yeah, like you said before, it's kind of a drivability thing.
Yeah, I don't see a big disadvantage, to be honest. What is a good way to tell what gears to run at a racetrack? Wasota Street Stock Concept. No rear wheel racing experience, like Ogilvy's Big 3/8 Goodmile Racetrack. That's a great question. You kind of got to almost just ask questions from some of your competitors and see kind of what the general consensus is. I couldn't really tell you, just kind of a general idea. I couldn't answer that question. I'm sorry. Ryan, thoughts on a rear end width 60, 59, and 58 modified? I wouldn't run anything under a 60-inch. You really want the car to be as wide as it can be. That 58, in my opinion, is way too narrow. 59, I've seen guys get by with a 59 with a short right rear, but that almost gets to the point where the right rear gets loaded so heavy that the car gets tight getting in, and then it just makes the car. What happens is it gets tight getting in, then you blow the tires off and it gets snappy loose on you with a narrow rear end. That 60-inch rear end is pretty common. Steve said a 567 at Beatrice. Yeah, that kind of reminds me. Yeah, come to think about it, I appreciate that, Steve. Ethan, call the racetrack and ask they maybe could get a hold and get you close. And that's very true, because I know, like at Deer Creek and stuff, when we run up there, we kind of asked the racetrack, and they've helped us out. And of course, we had quite a few customers, so when we published that deal up there, we kind of give everybody a general idea what that racetrack uses for gear as far as a starting point. And of course, everybody runs different RPMs. If it's an IMCA crate, you're pretty limited. I mean, your RPM range isn't a wide range compared to an open motor. Blake, you guys rock. One of the best things for dirt track racing that you guys are doing. Well, I appreciate that, Blake.
Awesome.
We look forward to it, and I know I was talking to my daughter, who's my secretary and bookkeeper today, and I reminded her. I said, "Well, we've got Bob and Chad tonight," and she's, "Well, I forgot all about that." And then I see Chad had actually made a post, and so we were good. Nathan, thanks for all you do. Love watching and listening to your words of wisdom. Joey Walsh, my old buddy, how you doing? How's my old buddy, Mr. Schrader? You guys kind of had a pretty good time down there in Florida. I see we had some pretty decent results, and the old guy's still clicking her pretty good. That's pretty good. I like to see us senior citizens doing good in this world. So, all of us with our AARP cards and our discounts for being senior citizens. And, of course, so Kenny and I are only a year apart. I'm a year older than he is, so I enjoy it. Ryan, seems to me I remember 62 and ones in the past as well. Thanks, and always good additional input. The 62, I think the 62, in my opinion, might be too wide for a modified. What we actually run is a 60-inch, and then we run a 2-inch offset on the left rear and a 3-inch offset on the right rear, and that seems to be pretty good. Or a 2-inch or a 3-inch wheel on the left rear with 2 half-inch spacers. I actually use wheel spacers quite a bit in that. You can take the 1/2 inch off and put it on the right side if you need to free the car up, and that seems to be pretty tight. I'm afraid if a guy gets too wide or out there too far on that left rear, it's hard to load that left or keep the load in that left rear. And so I'm not a big fan of anything too wide either. Now, Barrett, IMC rules states that you cannot add any material to the frame of the car to widen it. However, I've noticed builders are adding tubing to the front horns for a wider nose. How does this fit within the rules? Well, you got to be a little bit careful. What we actually do on our stuff is we actually cut part of that front horn down and then weld a 2-inch piece of tubing there so that we've got a good place to mount our bumper. But IMCA actually has a width rule on the bumper, so you can't go over that width rule. So you look into your rules a little bit more, you'll see a width rule on that nose and a width rule on that bumper, and they don't. We had a situation where we had the width right, but we'd moved the nose further to the left, and they frowned on that, and we ended up having to move them back and get the nose centered in the front frame horns. But our overall width isn't any wider than the stock frame rail. We just cut part of the frame rail out and put a piece of 2-inch tubing there. Penn, Ohio Pro Stock. Any experience changing upper bar angles on the rear end, uphill or downhill? Well, you've got to be. It's a little bit tricky with that rear suspension. We built a simulator this year for the four-link school or for the stock car school, and I was amazed at what that stock suspension actually does and how much it moves that right rear or moves that rear end around inside there. So you got to be a little careful. If you could raise it and put more angle in the uppers, it's going to give you more traction. But anytime you do that, when you gain traction, you can also gain instability getting into the corner. And so it's kind of a toss up on what you want to actually accomplish, because when you put more angle in it, it's going to get freer getting in. Even though you might have more traction off, it might get so free in that it hurts the car.
Part of why you run a 90-10 on a pull bar car on a modified. If you could put a dampening shock up there to control that force, the angle would be good and easier
Correct.
to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah, we built that simulator. I was amazed, especially what that right rear spring goes through. That's just unbelievable.
I seen that picture. I wanted to drive down and check it out.
Yeah, it's. I was quite surprised, man. I'm like, whoa. But anyway, Blake, I've tried running a lighter right front spring to get the car into attitude, but it seems to push after being loose for a second. I'm thinking I'm losing load. Would you run a spring cup with a drop cup into the spring to get the spring table to roll over a little better on a stiffer spring? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would definitely agree with you, Blake. I think that would be a good idea. Um, the drop cup with the Torrington bearing actually softens. It doesn't soften the spring up, but it frees the spring up so that it works naturally. And when you do that, you take bind out of it. When you take bind out of it, it actually makes it softer. So it's not out of the ordinary to have to run a little bit stiffer spring because of that. Tyler, what are general bump steer numbers changes that would be expected on an IMCA B mod? Well, the ideal thing would be, of course, is to get your right front so that it has very little bump in it. But anymore, it's kind of to the point where it's so hard with the components that we have and to get it perfect without bending some of the components, which is technically against the rules. But if you could get that right front to stay within 50 thousandths in a 3-inch movement is pretty good. I let our stuff go at 120 because it's, and then now that we know how much that right front bumps out, then we can adjust accordingly for our static toe measurement to consider that to go, because it's going to bump out. The left front is going to end up being a situation where you've got to be a little bit careful because you've got movement upward and downward. And a lot of times, if you get the bump to the point where the compression bump is pretty decent, which is most important, then your rebound can actually be on the verge of bumping in, which I don't get super excited about it, but I still try to get it to the point where I'd rather have a little bit more bump out on compression than towing in on rebound. So you just got to work with it to get your numbers. And answer to your question, the left front, we still stay within probably 60 thousandths as much as possible. But like I said, it's difficult with the components that we have to get that quite as good as what you would like it to be. Cam Reamers Motorsports, thanks for taking the time to do this so often, guys. We turn the replays on in the shop all the time. Well, I appreciate it, Cam. Cam's been running down there in Arizona and having a pretty good time. I see you've won some races down there, so that's pretty cool. And of course, Cam runs our shocks, so we're excited to see it when he's in victory lane. Well, we've got time for some more questions. If anybody's got anything going on, I can't stress the fact that those of you who are watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button and hit the like button so we get credit for that. Those of you who are watching it on Facebook, of course, if we can get some stars, that's a great deal. Just trying to grow the channel and do what we can do to keep getting things growing and keep going with what we're doing. So it's a lot of fun and we enjoy it, and I look forward to it.
Big weekend for me. I get to go back out to Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah, Close Racing. They've got their open house this weekend, and Ben Baker was at the stock car school, and he said he was going out there too, and he was thrilled at least that he gets to fly this time rather than driving, because the last 2 times he's been out there, he's driven our trailer out there.
We're driving.
You're driving?
Scenic tour.
Awesome.
Can't deliver machines in the airplane.
No, you can't deliver machines in the airplane. That is very true. The cargo area wouldn't be quite big enough for those machines. Barrett, can you explain why tightening the right rear chain too much throws the car tight on a rough racetrack? Well, what happens is when in fact, actually, I'll let you explain that one, Chad.
That's a very touchy subject. So when you tighten that chain up, it gives traction to the car because you're holding that right rear suspension in traction and keeping the load on the spring. However, if you get a hole or a rut in the rough, when that chain gets tight, it throws the front of the car to the right. So your neighbor on the outside of you is not going to appreciate that in a rough track situation. We learned this the hard way when we were racing. Back in the day, we started chaining down the right rear, and my brother was like, man, I don't know what you just did, but I gained a ton of traction. And all I did was shorten the chain. And, typical, if a little's good, more's got to be better. So the track actually was pretty good that night, so we tightened the chain up even more, thinking we were going to be heroes. And the track developed a pretty good hole going into turn 1, and as soon as he hit that thing shot to the right and hit the fence and cleared the right front off the car. So tightening that chain on the right rear is definitely a touchy subject. You're always going to want to keep that thing probably, I don't know if it's a B mod or modified, 1.25 inch would be probably the tightest I would go. And if it was a really smooth track, you could probably go a little more than that. But most of the range is 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches, I believe, right, Bob?
Yeah, and I'd caution you. I mean, it's definitely got to be the right scenario. On a real heavy type tacky track racetrack, we actually just put enough preload in that chain to keep the car on the spring so that it never comes up off the spring. And because you want to keep some load in that spring all the time, but you're just going to be careful not to put too much load in it, because it will give you side bite in the wrong area that you want to, because it sticks to that right rear like glue, man. For a rookie, would you recommend buying the wired or wireless performance scales, or spend more like the Longacre scales? I'm not that familiar with the perform scales, so I can't really tell you a lot about them. I definitely would spend the money and buy the wireless scales, because those wires are a pain in the butt, and wireless scales are great. Longacre makes really good stuff. We've sold quite a few sets of Longacres, and I don't think I've had a customer complain about them. I mean, they work very well. So that, I can only refer you to Longacre because that's what I know about. When do you know when to change spring rate or jack some turns into it? Street stock. Well, of course, if you're just getting too much travel, if the spring's just giving you too much travel, and like say if the right front's too soft and it's unloading the left rear, that's a good idea where you might need to put some more in it. And you could try it, and that's kind of how you know whether or not you maybe need a new or need a stiffer spring in one corner. Because if you put some turns into it and it makes it better, it's possible that you could maybe take those turns out and go stiffer and see what happens. So it's kind of a trial and error situation, but usually judge it by the fact on how much movement you're getting on that corner. Like if you're getting a whole bunch of right rear movement, that's a pretty good indication you need to stiffen that right rear up. Okay. Ryan, bird cages used to be a lot narrower. So did the mounts on the car, which didn't allow for much misalignment. Is updating the old narrow birdcage necessary when the chassis mounts are still narrow?
Well, I mean, if the cage feels good, if it's a bearing cage and the bearing, if you take the shocks and four links off and spin the cage, if it feels good, I always say if the bearings feel good, keep running it. There are some chassis builders that have made the wide cages fit their cars, so they get a little bit more spread between their four link rods and their shocks. A lot of it is clearances. Back in the day, we used to make the cages as wide as we could because we were using Teflon bearings and bronze bearings, and we wanted to spread that load out and try and reduce the friction. Well, when we evolved into bearings, then that wasn't necessary to have them so wide. So then we narrowed everything up so that we could manufacture a less expensive product with less material. And the bearings really have come, so far in technology with angular contact dual row of balls. So they're really good compared to what they used to be. So I mean, if your cages feel good, I don't ever recommend buying new if it feels good. There isn't going to be that much performance advantage. The biggest thing is that your suspension is bind free and there is no alignment issues when you get the car, at full attitude, making sure your rods are pointed where they're supposed to be pointed and that your heim joints aren't bound up. So, I mean, as long as things are functioning properly, just throwing it away and buying new isn't the magical answer.
Jeff wants us to explain the left front chain links and the effective to the chassis. Well, what I actually do, Jeff, is I set ours so that it has 1.5 inches of drop. So in other words, if I measure my shock center to center, and it's 19 inches center to center, I will set my chain so that that shock goes to 20.5 inches center to center. Then I've got plenty of adjustment where I can actually tighten that down. If we tighten it down much more than an inch, the car gets a little finicky when you start getting too much chain in that left front, because when you tighten down the left front, it's going to take side bite off the right rear. Even though it gives you more traction on the left rear, because as the car transitions through its movement, when it goes to lift that left front up and it stops and starts lifting the whole A-frame, that transfers weight to the chassis on the left rear and gives the left rear more traction. So sometimes you can rely on the fact that even though the car's a little bit freer, you can pick it up the throttle and traction the car up and drive the car out of that freeness. Or you can also add a little bit more J-bar angle to help tighten the car up getting in. Sean, on an IMCA Sport Mod, my left rear is 6 degrees up static, but when it's on the red chain, the left rear goes level. Is that okay? Okay. Well, I'm a little confused, Sean, on your question. Um, I wouldn't think I would want my left rear bar to ever go level.
Yeah,
Normally, like we actually, in a static position, our left rear trailing arm is usually about 25 to 28 degrees, so that in a dynamic mode, and make sure when we understand when we're talking static, that's basically ride height sitting on the floor, and then dynamic is where the car's rocked over on the right front and kind of in the dynamic mode that it is on the racetrack itself. We always try to get that left rear so that it's around 40, between 40 and 45 degrees at dynamic. And so hopefully that helps answer your question. How can you keep the left front from coming off the ground without sacrificing left front travel? Open
left
mod,
rear, left rear travel,
left rear travel.
right top rod.
Yeah, just putting more angle in that right top rod, more chain to it so that it's got more movement. Um, that would be my suggestion. What's your suggestion?
Yeah, if the right top rod don't calm it down, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes it's a balancing act between that left bottom rod. You want to do that because it gives you so much good steer and so much traction, but it also acts like a jack. I mean, it's trying to pick that car up. When that left front rolls underneath there, that thing's jacking the left side of the car up. So it's a balancing act between the two, whether you got, enough right top rod angle to sit it back down or too much left bottom rod that you can't get the left front back on the ground. But it's just a balancing. One of them two should kind of teeter it back to where you want it to be.
Blake, is the main point of the left chain to use the left front as an anchor as the weight transfers, almost like hanging weight? In a sense, it is. Yeah, it's basically doing the same exact thing. What we're doing is we're using the actual that 80 pounds of material that's up there in that tire and wheel and rotor and brake caliper and all that stuff. We're using that 80 pounds to the point where we limit how much it travels, because if we have lots of travel, then it's going to actually go to the right rear and not load anything. Where when we hit that spot where it starts lifting that left front or loading that left front, then it transfers that weight back to the left rear and makes the car uh, come up off the corner better. Eric, my son and I participated in the online stock car chassis school. For the first time we've done something like that, we were very happy with the information. When it comes to the class doing change things up next year, do you change things up year to year? Thanks. Um, we try to change some things up. The problem we have with the classes is a lot of times it's new people all the time. So when you have a class, like I think we ended up having 65 people in the class, and I'm thinking we had about 30 people watching online. Well, what happens is you don't know the experience level of everybody in that class. Somebody that might just be starting new. We had a couple of young ladies in our class last weekend that are going to be new to the class, and so they just kind of wanted to get some information. So we kind of had to give it to the point where that information is good to know for them, where if you take the class from year to year, there's going to be a certain amount of repetition in that class just because of those newbies that are just starting out. But every year there's always new things in there, and we had in fact I had one guy that was at the class, and he came up afterwards, and this is his fourth class that he's been to, And he says, every year I learn more every time I come back here. And I'm, well, awesome. That's kind of our goal. And so, and what I recommend a lot of times to people is take the class, race a season, take the class again because you'll understand a lot more that you missed in the first class, and then maybe take a year or two off and just kind of it just keeps everything refreshed. And one thing nice about the online schools, and you can still actually, if you wanted to take the class, the online school is always available. And the nice thing about the online school is it's 24/7, 365 days a year. You can watch it as many times as you want. And we had a guy that we always offer the older DVDs for sale for $99. And we had a couple guys from that took the online class that called today and wanted to see if they could order the DVD, which I wasn't sure why they wanted the DVD since they could actually watch it online at their leisure. But maybe the DVD is easy to play any place, so I'm quite sure. Steve, what are your thoughts on the Swift tight helix spring on the right rear? Well, that spring's it's kind of one of those deals where if we sold 10 of those springs, 2 guys will like it and 8 guys won't. The downside to that spring, from what I have found, is when it's a progressive spring and there's not as much movement to it. So when the car rolls over, it kind of gets to the point where it rolls, and then all of a sudden gets real stiff, and it can create some tightness in the center of the corner. Like I said, some guys, we've got a couple guys that swear by that spring, and I've got some guys that they use it as part of their fishing experiences. So I don't have the overall concept of that spring. I haven't had great positive response from customers. I have the right rear bar and the 5th hole on the Weir's 2-link birdcage. Is that a good place to start? Yeah, I would say 4th, 5th hole. Dry slick conditions, we run it in the 3rd hole. And then we can actually, a lot of times I'll run it in the 3rd hole and then run more angle in the right rear, because it seems like I can run more angle and gets the car to rotate better through the middle, but still have a lot more traction coming off the corner with it being closer to the housing. That seems to work pretty good. Recommendations for stagger on a dry or slick track. What would you recommend on a sport mod for the front and the rear? Well, I always run an inch of stagger in the front. We've got some guys that run a little bit more stagger in the front. Front stagger actually helps the car turn getting into the corner. It'll allow the car to kind of roll in. And we had a customer on Saturday that talked about the fact that how much stagger he runs in the front, because he runs a lot of stagger in the front and doesn't run any in the back on a stock car. And he wins a lot of races, so I can't say that it doesn't work. But on a rule of thumb, I run an inch and an inch. If you take too much stagger out of the car, I'm afraid in the rear, it can actually it's that old coffee cup thing, when you roll that empty coffee cup around on your table, it can roll a little bit freer. Stagger is going to be a little bit freer off the corner, but it definitely helps the car rotate through the middle without any drag, trying to drag one tire or another. Tyler, what are your recommendations for rear toe angles on an IMCA B mod when in static and at attitude? Well, what I actually run, and I actually can't tell you what I'd have to actually think about what the dynamic would be, but static wise, I always tow the left rear end 2 inches to the front and the right rear end in an inch. And what I found was when you get into dynamic, then the left rear actually goes into about 3 inches, but then the right rear actually goes straight. So I want to make sure that my right rear goes straight as it's driving up off the corner, and then more angle. What I found, more angle on that left rear. So we're trying to pick more weight up more in the center, and in theory, it's always worked well for us, and so that's kind of what we've always done. What would cause the left rear to come off the ground getting into the corner? Well, anytime the left rear comes off the ground getting into the corner, that means something's bottoming out or topping out. Your shock is topping out, or some chains topping out, or the suspension. You're not getting enough movement you're getting too much movement on the right rear and not enough movement on the left rear.
Definitely check for binds.
Yeah, I would definitely check for binds. Sean, I'm sorry, I was meaning the right rear bar goes level when dynamic. Oh, that all makes
a lot more sense.
That makes a whole lot more sense. Because I was thinking, man, that left rear going level, something's not right here. Well, I appreciate, Sean, you correcting that because I was really confused. But anyway, the right rear goes level. In my opinion, that's fine. A lot of times we'll even have the right rear bar go past level. I think that makes the car too tight. I think it works out pretty good when you have 6 degrees up and then it goes to level. That's a good point. I mean, I think that's a good traction point. Yeah, Corey says that's an A mod. It's there's definitely something binding someplace in the back of that car because it should not do that. Bob, are you guys still debating about doing an advanced version for the chassis school classes? We are. The problem is the time frame, and yeah, we're still. It's still in the thought process, Logan. We're definitely for 2024. We're going to look into doing some different things, and I think, in my opinion, I think it'd be a good idea to do an actual school. It just pretty much is limited to shocks and a 1 day deal that kind of highlights about 2 or 3 parts of the car and go into them more in depth than trying to cover so much information in a 2 day school where you have to kind of keep some things generic because you definitely are getting a wide spectrum of knowledge depending on who's in the class. Mike, our conversation today on the right rear spring, shorter spring 13-inch versus 16. Is the shorter spring going to stay straighter? Yes. After looking at that simulator, I would never run a 16-inch spring in my right rear. I think that would just have the way that right rear spring rolls, a 13-inch spring is definitely going to be the way to go because the 16-inch spring would definitely. I think there's too much spring for the amount of load that we put on that spring, and in the angles that it changes. You got to see what that right rear spring does, Chad. I mean, you'd blow your mind. I mean, it's unreal. Austin, how much is a big deal is it to have the 86J versus an 84J? The shocks are basically very, very similar. The 86J has a little higher end piston in it. You could put the higher end piston in the 84J. I mean, the basic shock is identical, other than one's blue and one's black. Well, yeah, that's really the only difference is the 86J has both J's would give you a jetted shaft. So it's just like I said, it's just the piston that comes stock in the 84s. The 86J has just a little more precision piston. Seth, having problem with stock mounts and Integra shocks bottoming out the right front. Have you seen any of this? Yeah, that's just kind of one of those situations where I wish there was an answer for you there. I hate to say you're raised the right heights, but you're kind of limited on what you can actually do with that stock mount shock. I don't know how picky the rules are, but you could actually space the bottom of that shock down a little bit, maybe. Put some spacers in there to get a little bit more clearance. Logan, good to hear, Bob. I definitely enjoyed the classes currently and you and Chad doing these videos. By the way, I finally bought myself one of those special BHE angle finders. Well, way to go, Logan. I appreciate that, man. We try to sell those angle finders. I think we still only have about 150 of them things, but we still have those angle finders, and they're super useful. I mean, man, I use the angle finder of mine all the time. Angle finders on your website that you told us about in the Sport Mod class in 2022. I'm hoping to get going in the right direction this year. Well, good luck, Logan. We sure hope so too. Steve, 2023 IMCA modified rules state 11-inch or 13-inch spring rate. Yeah, we were talking on the stock car that it needs to, you can't run, I don't want to run that 16-inch spring. But anyway, the spring rate for the rear, last time you thought maybe the rule had been changed, did you get any clarification? Actually, Steve, I didn't. I dropped the ball on that, and I really appreciate you reminding me. I will find that out. I will do that tomorrow.
I think it's good. 11 to 13 inches the rule, so the 12 is good, I think.
I know that's what it used to be, but like I said, I don't know if anything has changed there. I wouldn't think so. Well, we've got about 5 minutes here. If we've got any more questions, did I miss any questions, Chad?
Yeah, Ryan, the last one.
Oh, Chad, were you able to make the caster checker for this checking on the car, taking the camber angle out of the equation?
So the problem with using Bob's angle finder is you need two. So you got to get back on Bob's website and buy two. So if you're going to do caster off the spindle, you can't go off the ball joint. You have to go off a square surface, and then when you take that little square angle finder and you tip it back at an angle, and it's also tipped inboard, that thing gets lost. So it doesn't, the gyro inside of there, you can't have two angles going on. So basically, if you had that little square angle finder on the spindle and then you put another one inside of it and zeroed it to the world, that would tell you what the actual caster is. So, I mean, really, there's really no need to make a tool when you can just buy two of Bob's cool little angle finders and do it like that. I would still run the sweep on caster myself because them spindles are obviously made mass produced. So I don't know if that angle on there that they machine is actually in line with them studs. It depends then on who reams the spindle. So there's a lot of variables there. Your best bet is still to do the old school with the caster camber gauge and sweep the sweep the wheels left and right and get the true reading of it instead of the digital angle finder style.
Randy wanted to know, do you have a video of that right rear spring and where can we see it? Well, actually, I don't have a video yet, but we've made a list of videos that we are definitely going to take on the stock car once we get to the point where we can go on a racetrack. Because my simulator, we can't actually put a right rear spring in it. All we can do is actually measure the angles of what changes and how it actually looks like it would be. So I really can't do anything with it. We're definitely going to get some in-car video that's going to, and we'll publish that as soon as we get it on Facebook, because that's pretty interesting. Brandon says you can run an 11 or a 13-inch on IMCA Sport Mod. Okay, well that answers that question then. So when do you leave for Pennsylvania then, Chad?
Thursday.
Thursday.
Open house is Friday and Saturday, so I'll be there both days. Looking forward to getting back out to the East Coast. We were supposed to be there a month ago, and then that last winter storm, Cassandra or whatever it was, wiped that out. So the weather looks a little sketch for this weekend there too. So it might be a little snowy there on Friday and Saturday, but the travel out and back looks good. So hope to see some of the East Coast guys. I know we had one Penn, Ohio in there earlier, so just can't wait to get out there. I love that part of the country.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed it. I mean, when we did the schools out there, it's such a pretty area. And when the first school we did, when we had the warm weather and we went out on that bridge, and there's just a lot of cool things to see out there that we don't get to see here in the Midwest. I mean, it's just another part of the country that we don't see. And then, of course, all the racers. I mean, there's such a great group of racers out there. I mean, Joel's got such a huge customer base, and yeah, so I'm sure his open house is going to go well, and it looks like he's got a pretty decent group of people, like you and Ben Baker and some of the manufacturers reps that are going to be there. So it should be a great deal. So
yeah.
So those of you out there in Ohio, make sure you come and check Joel's open house out. So Close Racing Supply, and stop in and visit with all those manufacturers reps that are going to be there. Sean says, thanks for all the help. It's great. Well, we appreciate that, Sean. Like I said, we enjoy doing it and we have a lot of fun. Steve says, thanks, Bob and Chad. Always enjoy watching. And I was surprised, even at the schools. I mean, there was probably a dozen guys at the school. Now, you're going to be doing this Monday, right? I said, yeah. And Monday after the school. And Marcus, yep, thanks. We appreciate it. No doubt. Andrew, on a Weir's Bear bar with pucks, how often should I change the pucks?
We recommend probably 20 nights, 25 nights, depending on what you're running. If it's a IMCA crate, you're going to get more longevity out of it. If it's an open motor with a sticky tire like a UMP, you're going to beat that stuff up pretty hardcore, so you're probably going to have to change it more frequently.
Steve said he heard someone the other day talking about moving the entire right rear spring in closer to the center on an IMCA Sport Mod. Thoughts? I'm not a fan of that. The problem is when you move it in, you got to go stiffer on spring. And then what happens is the stiffer, you need the stiffer spring to get you control on corner entry, phase one, phase two of the corner. And then you lose a little bit of forward traction coming up off the corner because of that stiffer spring. So I think our spring from the rotor is 12 inches inboard, and I think that's a pretty good way to go. All right, guys. Well, thanks again. You guys were another great group of questions, and had fun and enjoy it. And we'll see you here in 2 weeks, which 2 weeks would put us at March 13th.
Cool.
And by that point in time, we should have some more good weather and getting closer to racing season, and it won't be long. So we appreciate it, guys. Thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.